Is the FIA really impartial when it comes to sanctioning? The Tsunoda-Norris case in Abu Dhabi 2025 puts everything in doubt, and Nico Rosberg did not remain silent. Can a simple 5-second penalty have a real impact on the history of a Formula One World Championship? And what happens when the person who openly questions that decision is not just any fan, but a world champion, an established figure like Nico Rosberg? What happened at the 2025 Abu Dhabi Grand Prix was not just another sanction. It was a moment that shook the foundations of the credibility of the FIA, the body in charge of dispensing justice in the premier category of motorsport. Abu Dhabi, the final stage of a season marked by tension, strategies to the limit and fierce rivalry between two generations of talent. It was on lap 23 when controversy broke out. Norris, in his chase for the title, caught up with Tsunoda, who had a completely different strategy designed to make the Briton uncomfortable. The instructions were clear: hold on, defend the position, delay Norris as much as possible to allow Verstappen to extend his lead. And that's exactly what he tried to do. But the Japanese pilot's defensive maneuvers were considered illegal by the stewards. The penalty came almost immediately, a 5-second penalty for changing direction more than once. Up to this point, everything might seem normal. But what sparked outrage was that Norris, to avoid the collision, completed the overtaking outside the track limits. An action that, according to the regulations, should have been cause for sanction. However, not only was he not penalized, but he was exonerated under the interpretation that he had been forced to leave. This difference in criteria, this apparent double standard for judging the same situation, was the breaking point. The networks exploded. The paddock was divided. And it was Nico Rosberg who lit the fuse by pointing directly at the FIA, remembering that this is not the first time that the regulations have been applied with ambiguity. He experienced it firsthand during his career and has constantly criticized it from his role as a commentator. This is not just a video about a penalty. It's a journey to the heart of one of modern Formula One's biggest dilemmas. Is fair competition being protected or certain names being favored? Can a championship be defined not by what the drivers do on the track, but by how the stewards interpret the rules? What happened on that lap at Yas Marina might seem to some to be a simple racing anecdote. But for others, it was the straw that broke the camel's back. And today we are going to analyze why this small moment has lit a fire that still burns, and that could forever change how justice is dispensed in F1. Abu Dhabi 2025. Last Grand Prix on the calendar. The season is decided on a circuit where history has already witnessed controversies that mark generations. Yas Marina became once again a battlefield not only between drivers, but between competition philosophies, team strategies, and most critically, referee interpretations. Lando Norris arrived with the real possibility of becoming world champion for the first time. The McLaren driver had had an almost impeccable campaign, exceeding expectations and standing up to the Red Bull machinery. His rival, Max Verstappen, the multiple champion, backed by a structure that not only perfects every technical detail, but also understands the strategic chess that a Formula One season represents. The tension was at its highest point. Red Bull knew it could not afford to give ground. And in that context, he decided to play one of his riskiest cards, turn Yuki Tsunoda into a defensive block. The Japanese driver, now without personal options in the championship, was assigned to a radically different strategy from the rest. Hard tires from the start, only one planned stop, and a specific mission: to slow down Norris' progress at a key moment in the race. All of this unfolded while Verstappen led the track, knowing that every second Norris lost behind Tsunoda could be decisive. And that was how in the 23rd round the chapter was written that continues to generate debate today. On the straight between turns 5 and 6, Norris placed himself in the slipstream of Tsunoda, with a higher speed and the clear intention of overtaking. But Tsunoda, determined to fulfill his role, executed multiple defensive movements, more than one in full acceleration. An action that, according to the FIA technical regulations, is explicitly prohibited for compromising safety. Norris was forced to go off the track completely, crossing the limits with all four wheels to avoid contact that, if it had occurred, would have ended both their races. Even so, the Briton managed to complete the overtake. Immediately, the McLaren team requested a review. The steward's response was quick: a 5-second penalty for Tsunoda for multiple changes of direction. But this is where the real controversy begins. Because while Tsunoda received his punishment, Norris was completely exonerated. The FIA argued that his maneuver was not illegal because he had been forced to leave, and therefore the fact that he overtook off the track did not merit a sanction. This interpretation divided the analysts, the teams, and the fans themselves. The regulations are clear. Overtaking off-road is prohibited. But it also contemplates an exception if the pilot is forced to leave. And there, precisely, the crack opens that exposes the inconsistencies of the FIA. The situation becomes even more delicate when considering the impact that this sanction had on the development of the race. Norris, free of consequences, advanced unimpeded to a key position in the fight for the championship. Tsunoda, on the other hand, saw his strategy ruined and accumulated one more point on his super license, leaving him dangerously close to an automatic suspension. A punishment that not only affected him in that race, but also conditions his competitive continuity for the remainder of the season. This episode was not a simple sporting incident. It was a clear example of how, in Formula One, an interpretation of the regulations can have technical, political, and personal consequences. And that is precisely what put the FIA under the microscope again. Because if the rules are open to interpretation, and if those interpretations vary depending on the driver involved or the context of the championship, then the question is inevitable. Where is sporting equality? Rosberg does not need to introduce himself. World champion, technical analyst, authoritative voice on each Grand Prix weekend. But what makes him especially relevant in this case is his history of complaints about what he bluntly calls double standards in the application of the regulation. Although he did not offer a specific textual statement about Tsunoda's case in Abu Dhabi, his reaction was evident to anyone who has followed his career as a commentator. Direct criticism, withering gaze, and above all, accumulated context. For Rosberg, what happened at Yas Marina was simply further evidence of a pattern that has repeated itself again and again in recent years. In the Abu Dhabi incident, criticism focused not only on the sanction itself, but also on the interpretation process. How is it possible that Tsunoda, following tactical orders from his team, receives a penalty that directly harms him, while Norris, despite overtaking completely off the track, is exonerated without further public technical analysis? The FIA applied the driver forced off-track clause as justification, but subjectivity comes into play here. When is a driver really forced? And why does that exception seem to be used only in certain circumstances, generally favoring names with media weight or key sports implications? Rosberg, as a driver who experienced firsthand one of the most tense and media-manipulated seasons in 2016, and as a witness to the regulatory chaos of Abu Dhabi 2021, understands better than anyone that the real danger for Formula One is not an aggressive defensive maneuver, but the gradual erosion of trust in its institutions. And that is exactly what he has been denouncing. The FIA not only faces errors of interpretation, it faces a crisis of legitimacy. Because if the sanctions depend on the context, the name of the pilot, or the impact that a decision may have on the show, then we are no longer facing a regulation, but rather a narrative shaped as appropriate. This is not a minor problem. When the steward's decisions are perceived as manipulable or incoherent, the entire structure of Formula One shakes. Teams lose faith in appeals, drivers become frustrated by the lack of justice, and fans, the soul of the sport, begin to doubt what they see on the screen. And in this ecosystem of tension, the figure of Nico Rosberg is not simply that of a former driver commenting on results. It is that of a political actor who knows the internal cracks of the system and who, every time he speaks, puts his finger exactly on the wound. The Tsunoda-Norris case was no exception. It was the most recent example of a long chain of decisions that seem to favor spectacle more than fair competition. And if figures like Rosberg do not denounce him, the question that remains in the air is who will. What began as a technical penalty during a race lap quickly became the epicenter of a sporting, media, and institutional crisis that shook the end of the 2025 season. The sanction to Tsunoda, its direct effect on the development of the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix, and the absence of a sanction for Norris not only determined positions on the track, they altered strategic dynamics, cast a shadow over the closing of the championship, and once again called into question the role of the FIA as an impartial regulatory body. The climb reached the highest level. At the final conference of the season, when the FIA was directly questioned about the unequal treatment of the Tsunoda-Norris case, the response was evasive. They limited themselves to repeating that the decision followed the current protocol, without offering more technical details, without showing comparative telemetry, and without mentioning the precedent that they themselves had established in previous cases. This incident has left scars. Not only for Tsunoda, whose disciplinary record was compromised with one more point on his super license leaving him on the brink of an automatic suspension, but also for the FIA, which has once again shown that the line between regulating and manipulating can be too thin. Leave me in the comments what you think about all this.